So if I stop sharing and then let Daisy talk for a minute, and then we'll introduce Deborah to you. And over to Daisy.
Thanks, Richard. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to give a quick introduction to this evening's session. The stigma surrounding menopause is thankfully changing due to organisations such as Henpicked, whose director we will be hearing from shortly. The mental and physical changes that take place when estrogen levels drop can cause a range of symptoms such as joint pain, disturbed sleep and memory loss, all of which pose serious health issues for sufferers and potential safety concerns for employers. Section 2.1 of the Health and Safety at Work Act requires employers to protect workers from foreseeable harm in the workplace. And therefore, those suffering with these hormonal changes may require reasonable workplace adjustments and specific risk assessments to support their needs. Debroah Garlick from Henpicked has kindly agreed to present to us tonight, and she'll be explaining in much more depth why and how employers can support those experiencing these negative health impacts connected with the menopause. Her organisation, which already works with the likes of Sainsbury's, Santander and Severn Trent, aims to encourage organisations, big and small, to be more understanding, considerate and ultimately compliant. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Deborah to you all.
Thank you very much, Daisy and Richard, and thank you for inviting me here today. And thank you for joining us, because there's never been a better time to start the conversation or get the conversations going about menopause. This week is World Menopause Day week, and actually October is Menopause Awareness Month. And we've seen a dramatic increase or a change in the way that people are talking about menopause now, and about time, because we are in a very, very different time. And I will talk you through today why we're talking about menopause now, what's different. I'll talk about menopause. Now, I can talk about this for England, but we've got this amount of time that we can talk about menopause. But then what I'm going to do is take you through what is it that you can do in your organisation to become a menopause friendly employer. Now, I've got lots and lots and lots to cover, but I will go wherever you want. So do keep the conversation coming in chat, and Daisy's going to be monitoring the conversation or your comments in chat, so we can cover what you want to cover during this session. We'll also be looking for information that we can share afterwards, because this recording is going to be available, absolutely. But if you want to go into any specific areas, then we can always send off existing or additional resources to you. One of them will be the checklist that you can see on your right, which is how to be a menopause friendly employer, or how menopause friendly is your organisation. Now, this is a self-checklist, and those organisations that Daisy mentioned earlier, the likes of HSBC, the organisations that we've been working with now, for some of them for actually 5 years, they followed this same structure, and this enables you to sort of look down there and say, well, we do that and we do that, we need to probably focus on that a little bit more, so you can make up your own mind about your areas of focus. And then we'll come on to the opportunity of having Q&A. Now, there is such a thing as a menopause friendly accreditation, and that's achieved by those employers who do demonstrate that the lived experience around menopause in their workplace means that it's comfortable for everybody to talk about menopause, and that where support's required or supports, somebody needs support, that they feel comfortable asking for it. And things like audits around the facilities in the building, or all of those sort of things are done. So just wanted to highlight that actually that checklist that you'll get, if you fill all of those and you think you're achieving those, then the same standards apply to accreditation as well. I just wanted to make sure that we knew that there was a mirroring going on there. So before we get going, this is over to you. have you, or how menopause friendly do you think your organisation is right now? Now, I'm not going to ask you for a big description, but have you started the conversations in your organisation, or do you have a menopause policy? So a simple yes or no in the chat box would be very helpful, because then I know how much detail I need to go into in each of the areas. So how menopause friendly is your organisation? Have you started your journey? Yes or no? No. Okay, we're starting to see that coming. I don't believe any of my clients have a policy. No, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. So I will take this from, if you like, starting from scratch, everything everybody can do. But first of all, I want to make sure that everybody's clear on why we're talking about menopause now. Because it's always been around, hasn't it? As long as there've been women on this earth and as long as we've lived long enough, there's been menopause. But actually, we're in a very, very different time. If I go back in time around about 100 years ago, women tended to experience menopause at around about 57. And at that time, average age expectancy was around about, well, 57 to 59. So you can understand why people would believe, because it was probably true for the vast majority, that menopause was towards the end of life. It was an end of life experience. That's probably where the mindsets come. But where we are today is in a very, very different time. We tend to experience menopause on average at 51. We live into our 80s. We stand a perhaps 1 in 6 chance of living to be 100. And more of us are at work than ever before. In fact, we're working until our late 60s. Some HR people I speak to will say we'll probably be working until our 70s. So when you start to understand that new picture, that menopause is actually a midlife experience, not an end of life experience, and you could be at work for 20, 30 years beyond your menopause. So that is a very, very different picture. And it's also worth adding to that, that the UK is an aging population. Actually, the global north is an aging population. And around about 8 in 10 women, menopausal women, are in work today. We know that statistic. And that number is going to continue to grow. So when you think about an aging population, shrinking workforce, more menopausal women at work, then the demographic case is incredibly strong. It's worthwhile doing a quick check as well and having a look at your own demographics, but I'd add a little caveat there. A lot of the time I see comments like menopause affects half the population. That's actually not true. Because, and you know, I'm going to do this from a health and safety point of view as well, but menopause affects us all. Half of us experience it firsthand, and the other half through our relationships, whether that's with a partner, family member, friend, or colleague. And I'd also add to that we work with a lot of organisations. We work with a lot of train organisations, for example, a lot of organisations that have got very high health and safety requirements. And it was actually one of those train operators that highlighted to me one of the health and safety risks. And he was telling me about his partner's experience of menopause. And he was saying, well, you know, I understand this, the hot flushes, but what people don't appreciate is sleeping next to a menopausal woman. I don't get any sleep either. It's duvet on, duvet off, duvet on, duvet off, window up, window down. He was very animated with his story, but he was making a very serious point. And it was one that I remember very, very clearly, because he said, when I get to work in the morning, when I'm going to be taking out a train, I need to sign a form to say I'm fit and well rested. And there are certain shifts that I can't sleep with my wife because I know I can't sign that form in the morning, in all honesty. Now, actually, I found that quite reassuring, to be fair, but it just highlights, don't just look at those that are experiencing symptoms, it can affect others too. So this is a completely inclusive conversation that everybody needs to understand more about menopause and be able to talk about it or be able to support somebody near them through whatever the relationship is. And ideally, that will change the culture and all of our mindsets from the outdated one I described earlier. But this is number two, the second reason that the Government Equality Office report highlighted that we need to treat menopause in the workplace urgently and importantly, and that was the business case. Now, this one is very strong too. Now, it ticks all of the boxes. I've got those on the slide. I'm not going to go through them all, but I will highlight a couple of them. The ones that have probably got more research around them. One of those is retention and attraction. We know from research, which came out again this week, that 1 in 4 women consider leaving work. The research was only done on women, by the way. 1 in 4 women consider leaving work during their menopause. Now, when you appreciate shrinking demographics, the fact that many of us will be at the height of our experience, maybe in a senior position, that is very costly for an organisation. If you just want to look at it from a business case, it's also very sad. But from a business case point of view, it's very costly to lose talent unnecessarily from your business. And if you look at Oxford Economics, they say it costs around about £30,000 to replace somebody on a salary of £25,000. So this is a bit of a no-brainer from a business case point of view, because you've only got to avoid one person leaving and you're already in a payback situation for the campaigns that you're running, because it doesn't cost that much. Simple things, very, very cost efficient. That can make a big difference to your retention. And I put attraction on there. That's a little bit sneaky. We've seen, actually this happened in June, the first organisations putting in their job adverts, we're committed to being menopause friendly. Now that was pretty hot actually, and it was a global first. But you know, if you think that your talent can walk past your door rather than just walk out of your door. So bearing in mind the number of menopausal women, the fact that they're the fastest growing demographic, it's worth thinking about that one too. Improves performance and motivation. Actually, I would say employees thank their workplaces for this, and that's always good for loyalty, isn't it? So it really does tick an awful lot, but I want to spend a little bit more time actually on the legal case. We think this is about to change. There's already a government review underway that says, does the current legal structure support women in the workplace enough during their menopause? And it's highly unlikely that that this will not result in legal changes. But actually, menopause is already covered by employment law. It's covered by, as you'll know, Daisy mentioned it at the beginning, the Health and Safety at Work Act and our responsibilities under that. But it's also covered under the Equality Act 2010 in the UK, slightly different currently for Ireland, but in the UK, it's covered under the Equality Act, under the protected characteristics of age, sex, and even disability. I'm going to jump in on that one because menopause is not a disability. But under that law, symptoms can be so severe that they can be treated as a disability under the Equality Act. And of course, compensations on CAT, personal liability, the line manager can get a fine as well. And you know, I think we're all betting on menopause being the 10th protected characteristic, so look out for that one. And anything else to say on the Equality Act? We've already seen a significant increase in the number of tribunals, not a massive number, but we all know tribunals are the tip of the iceberg. There's, you know, a lot more that are settled on the step, or possibly just employee relations. I say just employee relations issues can be presenting as employee relations issues in the workplace too. So bear in mind, menopause is covered under it. And to be fair, the only way to win at a tribunal is not find yourself there in the first place. Whether you win or you lose, you end up paying a huge amount on employee law, lawyers' costs and time and stress. So try to avoid that. And I did say there was the fourth one. This is my favourite, social responsibility case. I mentioned at the beginning, we are in a different time. And these are real quotes that we see every day when colleagues say thank you to their work, to their employer. it's not just in workplaces that there's been a dreadful lack of information about menopause, it's society-wide. So what employees are doing is saying thanks to their employer for filling the gap of information and support that they're not getting necessarily out of work. And it does wash out of work as well, doesn't it? Because those people will go to talk about their menopause and how to get support from others. So actually, I say kudos to the employers that are doing this. They're changing the culture of the UK and changing lives for good, hopefully, for generations to come. So that's a little bit about the why. 4 business cases. I'll send you a link that summarises all of those so you don't have to watch again. You can just sort of skim through the article. But they're the 4 key reasons. Understanding your work. They care about diversity, inclusion and employee well-being. That is the constant theme that we get back through there. So let's just have a look at menopause itself, my favourite subject. And I'm just going to cover some of the key facts here, something that everybody needs to know. And we have got a wonderful video that was released on Monday by the British Menopause Society, ITN Productions. So I can send you that because you can use that anywhere you like. In a team meeting or wherever you might want to. But let's just look at some of the key facts around menopause. Let's look at ages, stages, symptoms and solutions. Just 4 things. So I've already mentioned that the average age in the UK is 51, but menopause itself usually happens between the ages of 45 and 55. It can be later than that. It can be significantly earlier than that, whether that's naturally or due to surgery, for example, a hysterectomy or an oophorectomy, or due to certain illnesses. For example, treatment for breast cancer can very often put somebody into an induced menopause. So it's not towards the end of our lives, it's actually a lot earlier than people tend to realise. And I said ages and stages. A lot of people don't realise that menopause is a hormonal transition which happens over many years. And menopause itself is a one day in time event. 12 months, the following day is classed as menopause. But that's just the one day in time. There are years leading up to that point for the majority of us, and that is known as perimenopause. Peri simply meaning around, so around the time of the menopause. And that's when our hormones are starting to change. And actually, before they start decreasing, what you can see is significant fluctuations, which can trigger symptoms during that time. And after that one day in time, we are post-menopause for the rest of our lives. So that's the ages and stages. And the thing about the stages that I think is important to understand, perimenopause is the most mysterious part of the menopause transition. And I say that because many of us, our hormones are starting to change, but we may not have had the stereotypical triggers. You know, many of us don't start with hot flushes or changes in our periods. And I'll come back to symptoms shortly. So many people start to experience symptoms. They may put it down to something else. They may think, I don't know, actually life's a bit busy right now. Maybe that's why I'm feeling tired, or maybe this is why this is going on for me. And they may not realize that it's as a result of hormonal changes. And it's important to understand that actually it could be menopause, because once you start to appreciate that it could be menopause, then you can tap into the help and support that's available during menopause to reduce symptoms and also think about long-term health. So that's a little bit about ages, stages, symptoms. 3 in 4 of us experience symptoms. This is from the British Menopause Society, but this is a wide range, as Daisy mentioned earlier, but that's also a wide variety on how we might start to experience those symptoms. So in that 3 in 4, you have those that go, do you know, I get a hot flush now and then, but it's no big deal, I get through it, or I sit near the window or whatever, through to the 1 in 4 who could experience significant symptoms, serious symptoms, which could make them feel completely polax. So they may, well, it's highly likely they will require extra help and support, whether it's medical or whether it's more understanding and support at work. This is the bit of the good news. Everyone's experience is different. Good news, bad news, bit of both. Everyone's experience is different. Everyone's experience is unique. And I'll send you a précis of some of those tribunals, because often what I read between the lines, or actually some of them actually say it, is the reason that the tribunals happening in the first place. If I think of Merchant versus BT, the line manager there based his understanding of menopause on his wife's experience of menopause. And he said to the colleague, I don't believe you, my wife's experienced that, therefore she was dismissed. But everyone's experience is different. But this also, for me, highlights the need for training about menopause. You know, you can't possibly make assumptions on what somebody could be experiencing, or for that matter, their personal preference on how they want to manage them. So that's a little bit about there. Now, I'm going to just ask you a question. This was a survey through the TUC actually in 2018, and this surprised us because we asked women, there were only women surveyed in this particular survey, which symptoms affect you most at work? And I put this slide up. I was going to ask you to vote on it or decide, but you can see the thing that surprised us when this came through was hot flushes did not come top. Didn't come top. And actually what we saw in the verbatim were comments like, you know, I get hot flushes now and then, but I know what to do about those. I might sit near a ventilation, I layer up, and keep hydrated. I know what to do about them. But women said what we weren't expecting was the brain fog. What we weren't expecting were the psychological symptoms. Many people, and if you think about this in two categories, the physical symptoms, the ones that are most known, we've already mentioned them, the hot flushes, the fatigue, the sleeplessness, the aches and pains, which means that you've got to do some sort of, I don't know, desk assessment and everything, because people really struggle, can really struggle with aches and pains and joints during this time. Changes in periods, changes in need to go to the toilet more often. All of those sort of symptoms are more well known. But what people said was, and I didn't understand anxiety and worry or brain fog were part of that. And you can understand, therefore, how that can really start to chip away at somebody's confidence. And that was certainly what the verbatims were telling us. And remember that perimenopause phase earlier, the one that is most mysterious. Very often it can be the psychological symptoms that turn up first. So those sort of things combined help you understand how it's absolutely essential to get people trained up. And we have a lot of people that come to our training sessions, thinking menopause is on the horizon. But then when they see the full range of symptoms on the screen, and you see them saying, a bit of a light bulb moment, I've got that, and I've got that, and I'm being treated for that. And suddenly that's when they realize it's not on the horizon, they're in it. They didn't know about perimenopause. So it's amazing. And thank you for your comments. Fatigue and brain fog, very close for me. Me too, Amanda. I think some days I call mine my pea super because it just feels like it's really fogging. But there's a lot that we can do about it. And yes, I do think that those symptoms are wrongly diagnosed. We have a lot of evidence and feedback on that one. But just to balance this a little bit, it's highly unlikely that we will experience all of these symptoms. And actually, if you look at the 3 and 4 experience symptoms, that means 1 in 4 doesn't. So we all want to know what they're doing, don't we? But symptoms can last between 4 and 8 years. And there's a lot that we can do to manage those symptoms. It comes down to the power of knowing that it could be menopause, actually, in my view. And what I would also add to this, Daisy mentioned workplace adjustments or reasonable adjustments earlier. what we've found over the last 5 years is they tend to be for a small period of time, and they tend to be very not costly at all for the employer. And actually, during COVID, we've seen more and more people that have been able to work from home and demonstrated it can be done, and more productively sometimes. So for so many, working from home is good. You know, it's easier to manage your hot flushes. It's easier to manage some of those symptoms, but that's not for all, of course. This is just a little reminder for me, because one of the things that's worth bearing in mind, and I did say that this is a completely inclusive conversation earlier, and when we say completely inclusive, we're focusing a lot on menopause today, but it's also worth knowing that there are others in your organisations who can experience symptoms as a result of significant hormonal changes. So generally, when we're working with organisations on their policies and on their training, we always make sure we highlight that. And those could be people who, I don't know, are going through gender confirmation. It could be people that are undergoing fertility treatment. We all know the changes that happen during pregnancy, or many of us recognise those more often, or for some illnesses where estrogen is used as the treatment and actually can trigger. I know a detective constable did a session with us, and he was explaining about experiencing hot flushes while he was undergoing cancer treatment and having estrogen during that time. So do always make sure that we keep this in a completely inclusive discussion. It's important, that one. So what can you do in your organisation then? I know some of you said that you haven't started this. So when you get this checklist, do please fill it in. You don't have to fill it in and send it back to us. This is just for you. But I'm going to take you step by step through these and how we're doing for time. I'm going to flick through some of them more than others. And, you know, you tell me where you want to spend the time. So number 1, policy guidance document fact sheet. Now, I would say it's not law to have one yet. It may well change. But actually, many organisations have launched their policies. And what I would say about these is it doesn't necessarily matter whether you call it a policy, a guidance document, or a fact sheet. Every organisation's different on this. So if I think of some of the hospitals we work with, they have very, very, very detailed policies. Whereas if I think, and I was showing Sainsbury's there, they launched with a fact sheet because they've got a lot of other leadership things in place. And they said, actually, we just need to add in the content about menopause, and that fits perfectly with everything else we do. What's more important is that you have something. And I say that because I often remind people, menopause can be a sensitive subject. When I say, let's talk about menopause, it's easy for me to say that because that's all I do. I always talk about menopause, even when I'm not at work. You can always find me talking about menopause. So I'm used to it. And, you know, for me, that's something that's very comfortable. But so many people in our organizations find it uncomfortable. They might think it's a private matter and nothing to do with work. They might be embarrassed by their symptoms, and bearing in mind, you know, many of us still have the mindset that it's towards the end of a woman's life. So, you know, they might not want to think of you thinking that they're getting old or not up to the job anymore, or for that matter, culturally. When we work in some parts of the UK and maybe even internationally as well, some cultures find it even more difficult because it's certainly not something that's discussed at home, and culturally it's not something that's discussed. So think about or for that matter, I'm going to say line managers, because we have a lot of line managers that say, what if I offend somebody? I don't want to get this wrong and offend somebody. I don't know what I don't know about menopause. So it's important to have something written down and easy to find for the individual who might be struggling with menopause symptoms, and it's easy when they can go to the internet or your intranet and see that it's documented that your organisation considers this important enough to get something documented and put it in place. Or the line manager that suddenly has a meeting in his diary to say, or her diary to say, I'd like to talk to you about my menopause. it helps them no end if they know that it's something that the organisation has thought about and gives them some signposting on, actually this is what would be useful. So make sure you have something in place, regularly communicate it. It's not something to be sitting gathering dust. But yeah, there's some great examples of there, and we have a library actually of menopause policies, and they're fabulous. Very, very good documents. I'd say communication, creating the culture where menopause can be talked about openly. Now, this is interesting because the first time some people start talking about menopause, you might see I wonder what's going to happen if I say this. But if I quote Evelyn Dickey, actually, who's one of the independent panel members of Menopause Friendly, she said, when they opened the conversation, this is Severn Trent 2017, we didn't know we didn't even know if anybody was going to turn up for our event. But what I would say is it went on the internet to say, we're going to have a menopause event at 9:15 on a Friday morning, and we filled it with 100 people by 5 o'clock that night, just in Severn Trent head office. And she said she felt an organisational sigh of relief. People were thinking, oh, at least I can talk about it. It's okay. And for them, that was opening up the conversation. So thinking about different ways of communicating, getting your senior leaders to say, this is important to me, goes a long way in giving everybody permission to talk about it. Shared stories that help people understand you're not on your own. And there's usually 3 dates a year when we say, good time to talk about menopause. Right now, October, Menopause Awareness Month, or 18th of October, World Menopause Day. International Women's Day seems to be very popular. It's not my favourite because this is an inclusive conversation. It's not just for women. But nevertheless, it's a time a lot of people talk about it. And Women's Health Week in May. So if you sort of put those in your calendar and go, actually, we'll start with this one, see how it goes, but then keep the drumbeat going. It breaks down those taboos. It breaks down the barriers. And, you know, years of experience tell me, start the conversation. You'll be surprised who joins in. It's not just those that are experiencing it. You'll hear comments like, my mum's experiencing this. I'm going to the session to understand what I can do for my mum, or my partner's experiencing this. So, you know, these sessions are very popular. And training, I would say training is absolutely key. But we know, and if I think of a line manager session I did yesterday, we always ask 2 questions. What's your level of knowledge? Poor, some knowledge, good, excellent, etc. And how confident do you feel to talk about menopause? And you'd be surprised that in an hour, you can give line managers enough information to understand how it could affect somebody at work, what they can do that will be genuinely helpful for that individual thinking about workplace adjustments, and also how to open up the conversation in the right way. Because some of them, as I said earlier, some of them think, what if I say this and it's wrong? So helping them sort of get to grips with how you open up the conversation, how you respond to a conversation. And we always recommend, because we're often asked, can you come in and do some training for our colleagues? And we say, yeah, fine. But make sure your line managers know, because they don't like it when you blindside them and give people conversations and then say, now go and talk to your line manager about the workplace adjustments you might want. Make sure they're trained first, ideally. Same with HR and occupational health, because then that way the colleague journey, when they've had their training, it means everybody else that could support them's had the training too. So that's number 3. Now there's lots of different ways of doing this. Your own training plan will differ very, very much from somebody else. I know e-learning seems to be trending at the moment, or train the trainer on menopause, but whatever's right for your organisation. And these are the 3 that I'm just going to flick to, because I want to understand any thoughts that you've got, or anything that you think might help you to get the conversation going. Looking at your existing support, have you got an EAP provider? Have you got occupational health? Anything like that? We saw Timpson's come out this week. I don't know if anybody saw that, but the CEO of Timpson's said, anybody that's experiencing menopause in our organisation, we will pay for your HRT. Wow. the DFS people have done a phenomenal job as well, because they've actually been running group consultations for people on their factory floor so that they don't have to go and see the GP about it. And then it puts them back into the NHS system. Absolutely amazing support that's available in so many organisations. Uniforms, of course, and I'm sure many of you will, is it PC? What's the protective? PC? No, bit of brain fog going on there. Protective clothing.
PPE.
PPE, that's it. I knew it was a 3-letter acronym. I just couldn't work out which one. But, you know, HSBC have relaunched their uniforms in breathable fabric and a nicer fit, so people feel comfortable while they're at work. And, you know, some organisations, you know, it takes a while sometimes to get that done. But for some organisations, what they're doing is just saying, OK, we'll give you an extra set of kits. You might have the opportunity of washing more frequently. You know, if you're experiencing hot flushes or hot sweats at work, you might want to look at that. Or Sainsbury's have done one where it's a breathable shirt. So lots of things that are happening in the space of uniforms. And while we're on to, I'll mention this for Sainsbury's, desk fans, cold drinking water, looking around and thinking, actually, what could get in the way of somebody feeling at their best at work during menopause is really helpful. And I say, I mentioned Sainsbury's because actually we find during the training, during the programs running out, that involving your line managers, because they know your roles, they know your organisation better than ourselves as a training organisation will do. And one of the things I found really interesting is when we did an exercise with some of the people in Sainsbury's, one of the workplace adjustments that they have in one of their shops, it was actually, I think they might have rolled it out to others. They, if you're experiencing hot flushes, you get first dibs on replenishing the freezer aisle, was one that they came up with. I thought that was, we would never have thought of that one. So when you start to get people in the mindset of, actually, what could I do to help? If somebody's experiencing hot flushes, what would help? If somebody's experiencing brain fog, what would help? If they're lacking in confidence, what would help? So you can have some really fabulous sessions that involve everybody in coming up with the solutions. But that's the 1 in 6 things that you could do. I think with that we can sort of go into any thoughts or questions about, let me put that checklist on because that'll remind me of the 6 points. Any thoughts or questions about that? To make everyone aware, oh, sorry, that was you, Daisy. Any thoughts or questions? Where might you start? Maybe that's where I might open up this conversation. For those of you that said no, or no, to those of you that said yes, anything that you've done in your organisation that you're happy to share, both in terms of activity and what somebody, you know, what the feedback on that's been? Or if you've not started, where do you think you might start your campaigns? What might you do next?
If you just want to unmute and then talk directly to Deborah, I'm quite happy.
Shall I stop sharing for a moment?
Yeah.
Maybe that's better. Right. Stop share. There you go.
So has anybody got any questions for Deborah?
Very happy to take menopause questions as well, Richard, not just in the workplace. Okay. Anybody got any questions at all? I'd be very happy to take those.
So this is your opportunity to talk directly.
Sorry, just while we're waiting for people to, one of the interesting messages that I got about this event was, are we going to talk about the male menopause?
Right. Okay. I'll be happy to talk about. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the definition of the word menopause means ceasing of periods. However, being inclusive, men's hormones change throughout our lives, throughout their lives too. So we're always very respectful of that. Now, The changes for a male are different. So for us, for females, we have what the NHS call the fertile period. Then we have this significant flux and decline during the perimenopause, and it's actually those significant shifts over a relatively short period of time that triggers the symptoms. Whereas for men, their symptoms, their hormones start to change earlier, and it's much more gradual. And the expectation is that their bodies become adjusted because it is so gradual. So they don't tend to experience the same symptoms as we do. But I would say, Daisy, we do need to be mindful of the fact that since the Second World War, testosterone in men has been declining overall. And we do know that hormones in males can drop below a healthy level. There are some conditions, for example, late onset hypogonadism is one of those where the hormones are below where it's healthy and they can experience symptoms. So they can also have hormone replacement therapy or treatment to help them with those symptoms, but by and large, not in the same way that we do. Our hormones over this amount of time, short period of time in our lives, drop from there to there, whereas you've got much more of that going on for males. But, you know, others that, for example, those that experience fertility treatment, transgender people who undergo treatment, as humans, let's bring it down to as humans, that we can, you know, our hormones change throughout our lives from the day we're born to the day we die. And they influence how we look, how we feel, how we even behave. So it's important to be as inclusive and say this is a human condition of changing hormones. Yeah, it's an interesting transition. So do men experience menopause? I know the press use the word andropause. Let's just say we all need to be respectful of any of our conditions, whatever they might be. My experience of menopause has been a roller coaster at times. Thank you for sharing, Lorraine. How are you now? Are you getting help and support? One thing that I think is very helpful.
Normal now.
Sorry?
I'm bordering on the levels of normal nowadays. But yeah, it's been an absolute roller coaster. But I've been very fortunate in the areas where I work. I work in leisure in the local authority, and we're very, very open. There's a lot of women. We're very a similar age, and we talk a lot, and the men that are around us understand it, and we've been very fortunate, and our HR has got this massively on the radar and doing lots of work about it. So we're very one of the very lucky authorities. But the brain fog and having to write things down. I mean, I keep a daily diary of the day sometimes, so I know what I've got to do at work and what I did do, and it's yellow and green, and really have to organise my whole mind onto an electronic page, if you like, so I know what I'm doing. So yeah, I've suffered from it, but I've been supported. I've been very lucky.
That's great to hear, Lorraine, isn't it? Because that support makes the world of difference, doesn't it?
It's those issues, isn't it, Deborah, that then actually drag it into a serious health and safety concern, because those lapses of memory or concentration due to those hormonal shifts could be catastrophic in that regard.
Could. Yeah, they could, and also being confident with yourself and your knowledge and skills, because you know, we've all got our education and our competency, and sometimes you doubt yourself. That's what I've found. I think to myself, have I got this right? And you're having to revisit things to make sure you have got it right. So yeah, where health and safety is concerned in certain areas, yeah, it could be catastrophic. And
you could see then, Lorraine, also why people would then duck out of the work environment early, because they're doubting their own ability suddenly, you know.
Definitely.
And not wanting to come back. What about on the flip side, Deborah? Because Lorraine was saying there that obviously that's an inclusive and quite a sort of female organisation. What about if you are a lone female working in a very male environment? How do you go about having this conversation?
Well, that's really quite interesting because we see a lot of what you might call male-dominated organisations who are doing brilliant work in here. And the ones I can mention, because they've mentioned it on social media, Balfour Beatty, predominantly male, Kuhn and Nagel have done some incredible work in this area, because just because, if it's a male dominated environment, very often what we hear is, my partner, my wife's experiencing this, or my mum's experiencing this. So they're very open to talk about it. So actually, if I think of our contacts in K&N, they would say that the male environment has been incredibly supportive for them. But I was quite reflective and said, did it take you a lot of courage to say, actually, can we get this going? And they said, well, it is pretty, my contact was saying, it's pretty hard to miss some days that I'm experiencing menopause. But she says it's been the most inclusive and supportive environment. So I wouldn't make any assumptions around this. It's hard for so many of us to start this conversation. And I always say, you might be surprised who joins in, because we often find that you might think, well, they don't, why they're only a young person or male person. And we don't actually find a huge amount of barriers to gender and age in this conversation. And I think some of that is because there's been a lot of coverage about it. And, it could be your mum, it could be your partner, it could be a family member as well as a colleague. This is a life skill. That's what we need to sort of board. It's a life skill to know about this. We're all going to experience it firsthand or supporting somebody. So maybe that's why it's being as embraced in the way it is as quickly as it is. Because 5 years ago, nobody was doing this. Whereas we know 1 in 5 organisations do now. But can we get back to the point about the health and safety? It's a really important one there. We've got greater equality on the number of people that drive our trains or airplanes or use very, very dangerous equipment. It can, one momentary lapse of concentration through to from a series of difficult night sleeps. Yeah, that does make you shudder, doesn't it?
We've got a couple of questions here, actually. Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, from Sharon Parks. As a woman in post-menopause myself, just talking, communicating, encouraging the conversation, I say to women, this is the menopause and midlife or an initiation to go with that journey. It's great that we are all supporting one another in work or in our personal lives.
Spot on. Couldn't have said it better myself.
And then we have from Sue, one of our executive committee members. Has there been a reported impact during the pandemic for support for women?
Positive, I would say. It's been an interesting time. And again, I do take kudos to the employees that have continued this. And I say we've seen some, the trends that we've seen. We've been doing training throughout because we'd always done webinars. So, it was easy for us to switch to webinar. But what we experienced was, first of all, there was a change in symptoms. So we actually saw a spike in the reported symptoms around psychological symptoms. And, looking and sort of talking to so many people about what that might have been, actually, it was probably because everybody was uncertain about COVID. People were uncertain about protecting their loved ones, whether that was having children at home, doing homeschooling, or protecting older people, or your older generation, wondering and worrying about your job. Will it still be there? Will I be able to do it? So many that had never worked remotely, and suddenly they've got a laptop in the living room. How does that work? So perhaps understandable, we saw a spike in the psychological symptoms. The other thing that we saw as a bit of a trend that we said, actually, that's a positive, is that those that were struggling in the workplace, a physical workplace, who could work from home, were saying, actually, hot flushes, problems with periods, a lot easier to deal with when I'm at home, difficult night's sleep, I can start a bit earlier, a bit later. I don't have that huge commute. So not only were people saying some of the symptoms were easier to manage at home, but also it had made quite a difference, and actually they quite liked that way of working. So we're now seeing more employers that are saying actually they were productive, no problems at all. So we've seen a change in mindset of flexible working and working from home. There have been some where we said actually that's a bit of a challenge, because not all of us have the same home environment. So some people that were perhaps struggling with psychological symptoms and enjoyed having the companionship or somebody to talk to, particularly those who lived at home. We heard a lot from them. And I think the one, if you like, that kept me awake at night, and that we did so many communications on, saying, don't wait, because people were saying, how can I go and talk to my doctor during COVID? Well, actually, menopause for the vast majority is diagnosed on symptoms alone, your conversation about your symptoms. So a telephone appointment is absolutely fine. The NICE guidelines say for any woman over the age of 45 who is otherwise presenting healthily, it's diagnosed on symptoms. So, you know, don't put it off. I kept getting people saying, I'll wait until COVID's over then I'll go. And it's like, when's that going to be? You can do it on the phone. And people have said it's actually easier to get an appointment because GPs have been given instructions of phone consultations. So some good and some bads. And I did say kudos to the employers, because a couple of the supermarkets we support, they've not stopped. They've appreciated. They still need to sort of change the picture around menopause. And you know what? They've been busy feeding the nation and keeping loo rolls and pasta on the shelves. So actually, over the last year, I think they deserve a medal to keeping those conversations going. So yeah, quite a few differences. And I'm going to say webinars. I don't know where everybody is in the country. North Wales probably, but it's easier to bring people together for a conversation about this, and it's less embarrassing. Bearing in mind this is a sensitive subject, we often have people who will come to the webinar, but they didn't want to say, I'm off now down the corridor to the menopause meeting. They didn't want to say that, you know, it's kind of like, that's a bit too far for me. So we've seen an increase in men and young adults on the sessions, and we've also seen an increase in attendance rates. So
okay. We have another question, well, a comment from Zoe. I work in an all-male office. It's been horrendous. There are some women in another office who have not been supportive at all, and I've just learned to be silent and not mention the M word.
Have you talked to HR about the? By the way, I don't tend to. Well, it might be your preference if you're in a male environment not to say the word menopause, just to use the abbreviation. But it's definitely worthwhile talking to your HR, because the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development are really pioneering this and have been since 2018. So they should know about it. And who would you speak to, Daisy, in an organisation that looks after health and safety? Do you have a health and safety rep?
They might do. They might have a rep or a manager or an advisor, something like that. But it could also be the role of an operational manager, supervisor, something like that.
We also speak to a lot of mental health first aiders who are very, very supportive of menopause. So hopefully there is somebody that you can talk to about it. But you know, very often it takes the passionate person that says, I didn't get the support and I want to make sure other people do, that can make the change in their organisation. Could that be you, Zoe?
I hope that helps, Zoe.
Well, I did suggest, actually, I inboxed Zoe privately and said that she could always get in touch with you directly, Deborah, if she wanted some extra assistance on that one, which I'm sure anybody can do as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah, please do. It's menopause at Henpicked. One of us will jump on a call or something like that. But I'll put some those resources that I'll put together as well. It might be worthwhile printing off the things like the 4 key reasons why. And that checklist, and before you go and have your conversation with HR and say, what are we doing about this? We know that 1 in 5 employees do this. I think it could be higher after the amount of campaigning during this year. So so fingers crossed you can actually get some support there, Zoe.
Brilliant, brilliant. Do we have any further questions for Deborah?
Do
Okay,
always get in touch, always here.
And if we can, on our webpage, when we put the recording up, Deborah, if you can send us some information over the any sheets you've got, the ones you've shown tonight, if we can have them, or we can have a web link on our events page for Henpicked, that would be brilliant. Because at least
I'll put that
access.
selection together for you, Richard. And thank you very much for inviting us. And to everyone, enjoy the rest of Menopause Awareness Month. Okay.
So thank you very much. I've got just a final couple of slides to kick through. Not as exciting as what we've just seen. Okay, so please let's say thank you for Deborah for coming to talk to us. Really enjoyed it. There will be a short emailed survey to you after the event. So please, once you see it, fill it in, and then once we get it back, Deborah will give you some feedback on what the people thought, what the delegates thought. Our North Wales branch webpage is there, the North Wales LinkedIn site, etc., etc. Please join the LinkedIn site if you're not already on our LinkedIn site or a part of it. We've got our IOSH Twitters, we've got customer service, all the information needed is there. So finally, if I just say thank you, be safe, and we look forward to seeing you in October when it's machinery, in November when it's machinery safety. So thank you very much appreciated, and thank you, Deborah. Enjoy the trip over to Hungary.